Ricardo Ramirez was born on February the 29th, 1960 in El Paso, Texas, to parents Julian and Mercedes Ramirez, the youngest of 5, though he would later be known as Richard. The pregnancy was anything but standard, as Mercedes worked in a boot factory throughout and would constantly inhale chemical fumes, which caused her body to try and reject the fetus. His father Julian was a former policeman from Mexico, who would later go on to become a labourer, but he also had a strong tendency to frequently abuse alcohol. Julian would often enter drunk fits of rage, assaulting his own wife and children. When Richard was just 2 years old, he nearly died as a dresser actually fell on him and gave him a concussion. At age 5, he was knocked out by a swing and began to suffer epileptic fits. Before he even hit the age of 6, he had been knocked out several times, and nearly dying was a frequent occurrence. He gained temporal lobe epilepsy, aggressivity, and hypersexuality, which some believe could have been a contributing factor to what was to come. However, doctors at the time believed that he would simply grow out of his health issues. But due to them, he was removed from sports teams at school and his work began to decline as a result of it. He was only ever good at PE, but he enjoyed going hunting with his family, particularly enjoying the gutting of animals.
When I was young, when I was like 5, 6, I opened the curtains and outside the window there was a monster. Big, hairy monster.
And did he tell you to do anything?
No, I mean, I used to get scared a lot.
By the age of just 10, he began drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana.
I did start seeing something going wrong with Ricky Ramirez. I think what really messed him up was the acid. He would do a lot of acid. The stealing, I noticed the stealing, and then started as a peeping Tom and things like that.
When he hit 12, he became close with his cousin Miguel, who would often be called Mike. Mike was a combat veteran, but at this point he was already guilty of rape and murder during his time in the Vietnam War. However, he didn't hide this from his cousin, even showing Richard photos of the people he had raped, killed, and dismembered.
I didn't mind seeing all that boring violence. It was a turn-up. It was exciting. He used to say, "There's no thrill like a good kill." And feast on bones.
During their bond, Mike taught Richard stealth techniques and how he was able to kill undetected. During this time, Richard would often sneak out of his home to sleep in a nearby cemetery to escape the abuse from his father. At one point, Julian even tied him to a cross in the graveyard overnight as a punishment.
Was your cousin an influence on you? Yes, I look up to him. Because when you're at that age, superheroes, war heroes are like in comic books, TV. This he was vicious, mean, strong,
I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. My Uncle Richie was part of all of that.
Carrying the emotional burden of being molested by her uncle at just age 7. Thinking no one would believe her story, Rosie says it's a secret she kept for years.
On May the 4th, 1973, Mike got into an argument with his wife and ended up shooting and killing her in front of Richard, who was only 13 years old at the time. But despite witnessing a murder take place, he again wasn't traumatized and was more intrigued and fascinated, though he did become more withdrawn from friends and family after this event took place.
It struck me that she was dead, because I knew her pretty good. That had a very profound effect on me when I saw it.
But surprisingly, Mike was found not guilty due to insanity caused from post-traumatic stress disorder from the war and was sent to the Texas State Mental Hospital. By the following year, Richard started abusing LSD and moved in with his older sister Ruth. Her husband Roberto was an avid peeping Tom, and he started taking Richard under his wing and teaching him to spy on women undressing through windows.
What do you want the world to know about you?
The world has been fed many lies about me. I have read very few truths.
Who are you?
Just a guy. Just a guy.
How was he talked about in the house? How was he referred to amongst family members?
We always called him Richie. That's how we referred to him, or Theo Richie or Uncle Richie. During the day, he was like a regular uncle.
During his time in high school, he got a job at a local Holiday Inn, but he began to abuse his position, using his pass key to steal from sleeping patrons. Whilst working here, he ended up molesting 2 children in a lift, but this was never reported and he was never prosecuted. It would only escalate as he attempted to rape a woman in her own hotel room before her husband walked in and caught him in the act. Richard was immediately fired, but the couple were from out of the state and they refused to travel back to Texas to testify. So Richard Ramirez couldn't be charged for this, and he was still on the loose.
He said he was fired, he was dismissed due to the cause that he had tried to molest 2 little kids that were going up the elevator.
All these years, I didn't know about those children, and the fact that they were in the documentary, I felt like he gave me validation for what I had gone through all these years of keeping it a secret. And once I did come out and my family began, I told some of my family members, when I told them, they didn't believe me. I misbehaved, I was acting out, and when I finally started to say something about what had happened to me, they did not believe me. And because they didn't believe me, I kept quiet for a long time, until the documentary came out and I found out that he had done this to other children.
He dropped out of Jefferson High School in the 9th grade.
I have friends. And that is all I care to say, really. They are open-minded people.
In 1977, Richard was now 17 years old. Mike was released from the mental hospital and soon reunited with his cousin, and he would join him and Roberto to peep on women. They also began sharing drugs and alcohol, and during this time Richard began to become addicted to gruesome horror movies and often attended Jehovah's Witness meetings, where he gained a huge interest in Satanism and the occult.
See, some people go to Phoenix to get scared, you know, and they leave him there. I took it home with me.
During the summer of 1978, when Richard was only 18 years old, he was smoking PCP with his lesbian friend before he allegedly attacked, bound, and raped her. In 1982, he was now 22 years old when he moved from Texas over to California, and he began to frequently abuse cocaine. To pay for his drug addiction, he began breaking into homes to steal, but these petty thefts were about to get far worse.
I came to California, I came here to live, and I came looking for a pot of gold, but I found a pot of iron instead.
And people were telling me that he was going through the garbage cans and eating. I go, no way. No way. We wouldn't do that. I found out that it was true.
I'd like to know your feelings about what they call the devil's dandruff, cocaine. I love it.
On April the 10th, 1984, the body of 9-year-old Chinese-American Mei Lung was found dead in the basement of a San Francisco apartment building. But this wouldn't be connected to Richard Ramirez for another 25 years. It was later discovered that Mei Lung had lost a $1 bill and began searching for it with her 8-year-old brother. Richard then approached them and offered to help find it, leading them to a basement. He then proceeded to beat and strangle her before raping and stabbing her to death with a switchblade. He then hanged her partially naked body from a pipe by her blouse. This was Richard Ramirez's first known victim, but at the time, the killer was a mystery.
Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough, but then again, maybe they don't.
Do you have emotions, Richard?
No comment.
Tell me what kind of emotions you got going through you right now.
I'll tell you what, I gave up on love and happiness a long time ago.
Why?
I don't care to explain that.
On June the 28th, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was found dead in her Los Angeles apartment. She had been asleep when she was repeatedly stabbed in the head, neck, and chest. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. However, Richard had left a vital clue behind. He had removed a mesh screen on a window in order for him to climb through, and had unintentionally left a fingerprint, but he still wasn't identified.
People in this day and age are brainwashed and programmed like a computer at being nothing more than puppets. This nation, this country is founded in violence. Violent delights tend to have violent ends. Madness is something rare in individuals, but in groups, people, and ages, it is a rule. Killing is killing, whether done for duty, profit, or fun. Men murdered themselves into this democracy.
You're good at reading your script, Richard, but you're not much at answering my direct questions.
On February the 20th, 1985, Christina and Mary Caldwell were both found dead, having been stabbed in Telegraph Hill. Richard later bragged about having killed more than 20 people, but there was no definitive evidence to confirm that he was involved with this one.
You know, when I was on the street, I was a loner. I stayed to myself. I really had no contact with people. You know, I didn't think about other people's feelings and needs.
I didn't particularly care for people.
On March the 17th, 22-year-old Maria Hernandez returned home and got out of her car in her garage before Richard Ramirez appeared. He shot at her face with a .22 caliber handgun, but amazingly, as Maria put her hands up in a desperate attempt to protect herself, the bullet ricocheted off of her keys and saved her life. She fell to the ground and pretended to be dead in order to survive, but not all would be this lucky. Her 34-year-old roommate Dale Okazaki was inside and heard the gunshot. In a panic, she ducked behind the kitchen counter and witnessed Richard enter their home. She raised her head only ever so slightly above the counter to see what was happening, to which Richard shot her in the head, killing her instantly.
Do you see in the courtroom today the man that you saw that night that shot you?
Yes.
Would you point him out for the jury?
The man on the end.
What's he wearing?
Dark suit, dark glasses.
Defendant Richard Ramirez for the record.
I said something like, "Please don't shoot me again." Shortly after I finished speaking, he lowered the gun and he ran away.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
I'm asking you the questions, my friend.
Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil. Evil has always existed. The perfect world most people seek shall never come to pass. And it's gonna get worse.
Just an hour later that very same night, Richard visited Monterey Park where he pulled 30-year-old Tsai Lian Yu out of her car, shot her twice and then fled the scene. She was rushed to hospital but was unfortunately pronounced dead on arrival.
Richard Ramirez's whole trip was to hide in a tree or hide behind a fence and watch his victims at nighttime and wait into the wee hours of the night. And then while they slept, creep in, like a coward and kill him.
Due to these attacks and murders all happening on the same night, this story was incredibly well circulated over the news, with the suspect being described as having curly hair, bulging eyes, and wide-spaced rotting teeth. At one point, Richard attempted a kidnapping, but the person managed to make it away safely. As Richard drove away, he committed a traffic violation and was pulled over by a police officer. However, he heard the officer's radio reporting the kidnapping attempt, leading to him quickly fleeing the scene. Upon his escape, the officer investigated that the car was stolen, and inside was a business card for a dentist's office. Many witnesses had noted Richard's bad teeth, so they checked out the dentist to find out that someone going by the name of Richard Mina had been in to get x-rays for an infected tooth, and they knew he would have to return. Officers waited at the dentist's office for a while, but nobody showed up. So instead, they installed an alarm for staff to press if he ever did return, and it would instantly alert the police department. One day, Richard Ramirez did go back to the dentist's, and the staff member recognized him, quickly hitting the button, but it malfunctioned, and the alarm didn't go off. Richard was able to have his procedure before leaving without incident.
They are desires, whereas if I didn't give in to them, I would be crushed by them. I believe in the evil in human nature. This is a wicked world, and in a wicked world, wicked people are born. I'm not going to blame society, my race, or people, or anything. It is up to the individual like myself to keep on knocking on whatever door they want to get into.
On March the 27th, just 10 days later, Richard snuck into a home in Whittier, California, belonging to 64-year-old Vincent Zazzara and his 44-year-old wife Maxine. He shot Vincent in the head as he slept, killing him instantly, which woke up his wife. Ramirez proceeded to tie her up and demanded to know where their valuables were. As he ransacked the room, she managed to escape the knots and grabbed a shotgun from underneath her bed. However, when she pointed it at the murderer and fired, it wasn't loaded. Richard, in an angry rage, shot her 3 times to kill her before grabbing a carving knife from the kitchen. He mutilated her body, cutting an inverted cross into her chest before removing her eyeballs and later keeping them in a jewelry box inside his apartment. He attempted to have sex with the corpse, but he was so shaken up by Maxine attempting to shoot him that he was unable to gain an erection. Richard then fled the scene, and their son Peter found the bloodbath not long after. However, he again wasn't too careful, as he had left footprints in the couple's flower beds. In addition, investigators realized that the bullets matched the previous crime scenes, concluding that they were connected. They knew they had a serial killer on their hands.
You have now entered a very rare group of people in this country. You're in the ranks of Charlie Manson, Ted Bundy. You claim you didn't commit these murders, but you're right in there now as far as everybody else is concerned.
Serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large one. They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times. A serial killer comes about by circumstances and like a recipe, poverty, drugs, child abuse. These things, contribute to a person, to a person's frustration and anger, and at some point in life, he explodes.
On May the 14th, 1985, Richard visited Monterey Park once again, where he entered the home of 66-year-old Bill Doy and his 56-year-old disabled wife Lillian. Bill had awoken to see Richard and reached for his own gun, but he was quickly shot in the face and beaten unconscious. Ramirez proceeded to find Lillian in her own room, where he tied her up and ransacked the house looking for valuables. He only returned to rape her. Bill did manage to make it to hospital, but unfortunately died as a result of his injuries, while Lillian managed to survive.
He needed to associate gruesome violence with sex in order to be completely satisfied. He also told me that he had to violently fantasize about his victims before he could go away sexually gratified.
Later that same month, on May the 29th, Richard stole a car and drove it to Monrovia, California. He entered the home of 83-year-old Mabel Bell and her 81-year-old disabled sister Florence Lang. He found a hammer in their kitchen before bludgeoning Florence and tying her up in the bedroom. He proceeded to find Mabel, where he also attacked her and used an electrical cord to shock her. But he wasn't done, as he then raped the disabled Florence before using some of Mabel's lipstick to draw a satanic pentagram on her thigh, as well as on the bedroom walls. Because of this, for a while, investigators believed that they were actually dealing with a Charles Manson copycat killer.
Do you worship the devil? Have you ever studied Satanism?
There are different sects of Satanism.
Have you studied, just yes or no, have you studied Satanism?
Yes, I have.
Are you a worshiper of the devil?
No comment.
Come on, Richard.
I can tell you a little bit about Satanism.
Well, I'm interested in hearing what you got to say.
It is undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. It is power without charity. A Satanist admits to being evil.
Satan is a stabilizing force in my life. It gives me a reason to be, an excuse to rationalize.
These women wouldn't be found for another 2 days, but amazingly, both were still alive, but comatose. Tragically, however, Mabel would succumb to her injuries and later passed away in hospital, while her sister managed to survive. The very next day, he drove that same stolen vehicle to Burbank, where he snuck into the home of 42-year-old Carol Kyle. He tied up her and her 11-year-old son before ransacking the house for valuables. He only released Carol to show him where more of them were, before repeatedly raping her, ordering her to not look at him during it or he would cut out her eyeballs. After the assault was finally over, Richard tied her to her son and fled the scene.
I used to love, doing burglaries so much, right? I still dream about this.
You dream about it now?
Yeah, excitement.
On June the 27th, 1985, 32-year-old Patty Elaine Higgins was murdered in Arcadia, but wasn't discovered until July the 2nd. She was found to have been sodomized and strangled with her throat slashed. Upon his arrest later, Richard was initially charged for this murder, but they were then dropped due to insufficient evidence, and there's no definitive way of knowing if he was truly responsible for this murder.
For some, it is the very act of killing another human being that is sexual. Bloodlust, I guess you could say. Serial killers and killers have the advantage in that they use the element of surprise, darkness, and such things as this.
On July the 2nd, 1985, the same day Patty Elaine Higgins was found, Richard stole a car and drove back to Arcadia, where he entered the home of 75-year-old Louise Cannon, who was asleep in her bedroom. He proceeded to bludgeon her with a lamp before attacking her with a knife he had found in the kitchen. Richard continued to repeatedly stab her, even after she was already dead.
Why on earth would you have hurt those people? Why did you kill those people?
No comments. No comments. I cannot answer that at this time.
3 days later, Ramirez broke into the Sierra Madre home of 16-year-old Whitney Bennett. He found her sleeping and bludgeoned her with a tire iron. He attempted to find a knife to finish the job but was unsuccessful, so he attempted to strangle her with a telephone cord instead, when something peculiar happened. Richard claimed that he saw electrical sparks emanate from the cord, and Whitney began to breathe again. Ramirez believed that Jesus had actually intervened to save her. Whitney Bennett actually survived the assault, though she required 478 stitches to close the lacerations to her scalp.
Serial killers and most killers in general have a dead conscience. No morals, no scruples. Some of them don't even care whether they live or die themselves. And they're just walking dead.
I don't care about myself, really. I don't care about what happens to me. I never did, really.
2 days later, on July the 7th, Richard broke into the Monterey Park home of 60-year-old Joyce Nelson, who was asleep on her living room couch. Ramirez simply stomped on her face until she died. When she was discovered, she still had his shoe print on her face.
Would your anger subside if you had to wipe up your mother's blood? I couldn't finish it. I had to leave my brother to finish that chore.
That very same night, Ramirez entered the home of 63-year-old Sophie Dickman, whom he assaulted and proceeded to steal her valuables. He demanded more, but she assured him that he had all of them, to which Richard forced her to swear on Satan that there were no more valuables anywhere else in the house. On July the 20th, Richard bought a machete before driving to Glendale. Once there, he broke into the home of 66-year-old Leela Needing and her 68-year-old husband Maxim. While the couple slept, he hacked away at them with the machete, before shooting them both with a .22 caliber handgun. He proceeded to dismember the remains, stole their valuables, and then fled the scene. He then drove to Sun Valley that very same day and at around 4:15 a.m. broke into the home of the Covenant family. He discovered 32-year-old Chaineron, who was asleep. He shot him in the head, killing him instantly. He then found his wife Somkid, who he beat and raped, before finding their 8-year-old son, who he also beat and tied up, before dragging his mother around to show him where the valuables were. Once he had them, once again he forced her to swear on Satan that there were no more left. On August the 6th, Richard drove to North Ridge, where he broke into the home of 27-year-old Virginia Peterson and her 28-year-old husband Chris. He shot Virginia, and when Chris attempted to escape, he took a bullet to the neck. The husband attempted to fight back, managing to dodge a further 2 bullets before Richard fled the scene. The couple survived.
He entered through an unlocked door through the back entrance and entered into the bedroom. I awoke to see a man standing there. I shouted at him, "Who are you? What do you want?" We argued back and forth for a moment or two. Then he leaned over and shot me directly in the face. As I fell backwards, he leaned over then and shot my husband. We lay back down on the bed and stunned because we couldn't believe that we had been shot. It was the furthest thing from our minds. There was no pain at the time. Then we became aware that he was standing over us laughing. At that time, my husband rose up and gave chase. He chased him down the hallway because we had a small daughter at the other end. Ramirez fired 2 more shots, to which my husband faked being hit. He was grazed by one of the bullets, so that if Ramirez came at him again, perhaps he could tackle him. At that point, he turned and ran out of the house.
I have a constant reminder I have physical problems and I have tinnitus in my ear, and I dwell upon it more than I should. But I promised my daughter that I'd make sure he was always locked away on this.
2 days later, Richard Ramirez stole a car and drove to Diamond Bar, California, where at around 2:30 a.m. he entered the home of 27-year-old Sakina Abawath and her 31-year-old husband Elias. He found Elias first, who was asleep, shooting and killing him instantly. He proceeded to beat Sakina and forced her to reveal where they kept their valuables. After she had surrendered them, Richard raped her, making her swear to Satan that she won't scream. During this, their 3-year-old son walked into the room, but Richard, undeterred, tied up the child and raped his mother in front of him before leaving. Sakina managed to untie her son and sent him to the neighbors to get help. These attacks had spread fear across California, as the killer could have been anyone, and there was no known motive or pattern. Both men and women were targeted, all of different ages and all different ethnicities. Anyone was a suspect, and anyone could be a victim. Richard was keeping a close eye on the news reports and decided that now was the time to leave Los Angeles and head to San Francisco. On August the 18th, 1985. Richard Ramirez entered the home of 62-year-old Barbara Pan and her 66-year-old husband Peter. He discovered Peter sleeping before shooting and killing him instantly. He then found Barbara, who he beat and sexually assaulted, before shooting and leaving for dead. Before fleeing the scene, he took the time to use lipstick to draw a pentagram, as well as the words Jack the Knife on the bedroom wall. But Richard was beginning to get clumsy, and his mistakes were becoming more common. He had become too confident, sometimes even relaxing inside the home after the crimes, even making himself some food afterwards. On this occasion, he ate their food before vomiting on the floor and then masturbating on top of it. But to make matters worse for him, he had accidentally left a shoe print. And this was a huge piece of evidence, as they were for a very specific brand of shoes called Avia, which weren't very common at the time. Investigators contacted the manufacturers and discovered that only 6 had been sold in the United States in Richard's size. 5 were in Arizona and only 1 in California. This, in addition to the bullets found, now confirmed that the murders in both San Francisco and Los Angeles were all done by the same person. But unfortunately, this incredible evidence was about to lead to a dead end. Mayor Dianne Feinstein made the massive mistake of revealing this in a press conference. Naturally, this angered law enforcement, as they knew the killer would be keeping an eye on the case and would then destroy any vital evidence going forward. Sure enough, that very night, Richard threw those shoes over the Golden Gate Bridge, and they were never found. It was at this point he decided to leave San Francisco for a few more days to lay low.
A serial killer is caught up in a frenzy, and by the time it's over and done with, he'll reflect back on it and wish it had lasted longer.
On August the 24th, 1985, Richard Ramirez stole a car and drove to Mission Viejo, to the home of a family who had only just returned from a holiday to Mexico. They were all asleep, except for their 13-year-old son, James Romero III. He went outside to get a pillow from inside a truck which was locked. He then began to hear a rustling noise nearby, which he assumed was just an animal. He did check it out, but couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. James headed into the family garage to work on his mini bike, before he began to hear footsteps from outside the house. He had a look to see Richard through a window, but he only believed that he was a peeping Tom.
Do you think he saw you?
Yeah, I know he was aware.
Why did he come after you?
I'm not too sure.
He quickly alerted his parents, which led to Richard quickly fleeing the scene, but James was fast enough to rush outside to take note of the car and license plate.
It was an instinct, and I just went and I saw somebody at our house, and I just went chasing after them.
He merely believed he had scared off a potential thief, having no idea that he may have just saved all of their lives.
Feel like a hero?
Yeah. At that time, I really didn't understand until when we had the conference, and all of a sudden I was presented with all the awards and gifts.
After running away, Richard broke into the home of 30-year-old Bill Carnes and his 29-year-old fiancée Inez Erickson. Richard cocked his gun, which woke up Bill before shooting him 3 times. He then told Erickson that he was the Night Stalker, forcing her to swear her love to Satan before beating her and tying her up. He ransacked the house for valuables before raping her and telling her that the Night Stalker was here. After Ramirez left, she managed to untie herself and ran to get help. 2 of the 3 bullets were removed from Bill's head, and amazingly, he survived.
What he did to me has been the total destruction of my life and my girlfriend's life.
After the attack, Inez gave Richard's description to the police, but he had also left another footprint at James Romero's house as well. The stolen car was found abandoned in Koreatown, and despite Richard trying desperately to wipe it clean, a fingerprint was found on the rearview mirror. Due to his previous drug and traffic violations, the fingerprint managed to pull up his record. This system was actually brand new and only contained criminals born after January the 1st, 1960, just a month before Richard Ramirez was born. It's a massive miracle that they were even able to find his identity with this new system. They had now identified Richard Ramirez as the killer, and his mugshot was released to the public.
We are satisfied that we now have the identity of the individual who is being commonly referred to as a Night Stalker, who has been responsible for the number of murders and assaults in Los Angeles, Orange counties, and up in San Francisco. The individual who we believe is responsible for these crimes, a man by the name of Richard Ramirez, has a number of aliases: Noah Jimenez, Richard Moreno, Nicolas Adami, Richard Munoz, and Richard Mena. He's a male Latin, 25 years of age, 6'1", 155 pounds, black hair, brown eyes, extreme decay of both his upper and lower front teeth, slightly bulging eyes, and thick lips.
But amazingly, Richard hadn't been keeping an eye on the news at this point. He was completely unaware that his picture had now been plastered everywhere for his capture. On August the 30th, 1985, Richard Ramirez took a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother. But he wasn't home, so he returned to Los Angeles the following day. He managed to walk directly past several police officers who were staking out the bus terminal to try to catch him, but they didn't recognize him. He entered a convenience store before spotting some Hispanic women who were panicking and calling him El Matador, which translates to the killer in Spanish. This is when he saw his face on the front page for the first time, calling him Invasor Nocturno, translated as Night Invader. In a panic, Richard quickly fled the store. He ran across the Santa Ana freeway where he attempted to steal a car, but he was unaware that the owner was underneath it, and they quickly pulled him back out. Richard continued running and attempted to steal the car keys from Angelina De La Torre before her husband Manuel hit him in the head with a fence post.
The man tried to take the car, and then the owner came out and hit him with I don't know with what, and he was hurt. And, well, that's about it. They caught him. The police got him.
How do you feel? If this guy is possibly the intruder, how do you feel now?
Relief.
A huge crowd of locals recognized him from the press and chased him down Hubbard Street in Boyle Heights, where they held him down and violently beat him.
There's a big old commotion, and we just chased down this guy down the street. And as it turns out, it might be that walk-in killer.
What was he doing?
He was trying to take off with my neighbor's car. He's trying to steal it. And when he couldn't do that, he ran across the street and he tried to get this one lady that was just starting her car, tried to get her out and take her car. Then all the neighbors just hung together and got him, chased him down the street.
And then what did you do when you caught up with him?
I socked him. He looked like the guy in the newspaper, the photograph.
Bad teeth and all?
Yeah. He talked, tried to say something, but he was all dazed. He was getting hit with that bar in the head.
Did he seem intoxicated or seem coherent? Or?
He seemed scared, very scared.
The guy came at me with a piece of iron bar, and he hit me once over the head. I turned around and he swung it again and he hit me on the wrist. And at that point, I couldn't run anymore. I sat down to take a breather, and I saw a sheriff's patrol car coming down the street, and I knew that, my life was over.
At around 8 a.m, police were called regarding a disturbance, to which they found Richard Ramirez savagely beaten and were finally able to arrest him after a year-long killing spree.
We received a call in the vicinity of Euclid and Garnet in the city in Hollenbeck Division. We had units respond to the location. They put out a crime broadcast that numerous citizens in that vicinity had seen a suspect matching the description of the so-called Night Stalker in the vicinity of that area, running through the houses. We set up a perimeter, dispatched units to the location. I coordinated the search, and approximately within 30 minutes, we apprehended the suspect in the 3700 block of East Hubbard.
We're happy to announce that the individual we have in custody is Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
I can't begin to tell you how proud we, all of us, are of the people in this community who, to a man and a woman, were involved in trying to track this guy down and capture him.
After Richard Ramirez was arrested and identified as the Night Stalker, how was he spoken about within the home with other family members?
They really didn't say much about it. They really didn't say much about what was going on with him. I know for some people in the family, they thought he was innocent. And understandably, because this is a family member. I know that weekend that everything had happened. They sent us on a camping trip with a family friend. And so, yes, they tried their very best to shield all of the children from this with the newspapers and everything. So a lot of the details, we were clueless about them.
As the crime spread across two different cities, it became difficult to press charges due to differing laws between the two jurisdictions, which caused massive delays, and some charges even had to be dropped completely.
The issue of the death penalty is literally a political issue. There are times in society when the world is willing to allow that to happen because we're very conservative and we're into retribution. And there are other times when society is more free and more liberal and we say, that's not the way to go. The people that we're talking about today, these are the highlights, the creme de la creme of the terrors, of the monsters, as Geraldo refers to them. The fact is that society, the legal system responds in a large part to societal demands. No mass murderer, in my knowledge, and Dr. Fox and I were talking about this, has ever been found not guilty by reason of insanity, although many of them were clearly crazy. While it is theoretically possible that any one of these people can indeed be paroled, it has not happened yet. The reason it doesn't happen... It will. The reason it doesn't happen is because of you, because of shows like this, and because of the effort by the public. The judges will not parole for that reason. If you are quiet and this doesn't occur, the person who's not known, the non-Charles Manson, the guy who shoots someone at McDonald's, where that person can get parole, that person can have things.
Do you believe the state of California will execute him?
They will, but I don't believe that'll be within 10 years.
The trial didn't officially start until July the 22nd, 1988, 3 years later, where Ramirez raised his hand with a pentagram drawn on it and exclaimed, "Hail Satan!"
As far as Satan is concerned, I believe in a malevolent being. His description eludes me, but I have felt powers that are evil.
Legions of the night, night breed. Repeat not the errors of Nightcrawler and show no mercy. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells within us all. That's it.
During his time inside, Richard surprisingly received letters from supporters on the outside world.
I love Richard and I know he's innocent.
Why were you in the courtroom today?
I just wanted to see what he looked like. I think he's cute. Everyone makes him look so bad, you know, but I know that he's a nice person because I've met him and I know.
He's convicted of 13 murders.
I know. But he's really a nice guy. It's very out of the usual. It's very out of the norm to be able to do that for a certain amount of time and length, a period of time, and get away with it. Especially the outrageousness of it, the kind of murders that he did. When I went to go visit him, I asked him, you know, I said, how many other girls visit you? I want to know. And he kind of laughed and said, there's 2, but I already know them, and I've known them for a while, and they're just like acquaintances, and, you know, kind of, you know, made me think that and believe like I was like the only one that he liked that was visiting him.
How do you respond to people who are going to think
You're crazy for this.
I'll just say that they just don't understand.
One of which was named Doreen Lyoy, who wrote nearly 75 letters showing her support. In 1988, after years of visiting, Richard actually proposed to her.
There are many who would look at Richard Ramirez in the eye and say, he is the face of evil. Mm-hmm. And yet you look at him and you see the man of your dreams.
Yes.
Who needs glasses here?
I can't help the way the world looks at him. They don't know him the way I do.
On August the 3rd that year, Ramirez was allegedly overheard planning to smuggle a gun into the courtroom to shoot a prosecutor, leading to a metal detector being installed. However, the trial was delayed on August the 14th when juror Phyllis Singletary didn't show up and was then found dead in her apartment. Fear began to spread as people believed that Richard had somehow orchestrated her death from inside his cell, but it was later discovered that she was murdered by her own boyfriend before he killed himself. However, the juror who replaced her was far too scared to even return back to her apartment in case somebody was waiting for her. On September the 20th, 1989, Richard Ramirez was found guilty and convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The judge described his actions as exhibiting cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. During the entire trial, Richard never once showed any remorse, sympathy, or regret for any of his horrific crimes.
Confer with his client without the
I don't want to confer with
gentleman there, and perhaps he can at least advise Mr. Ramirez of his legal options. The gentleman standing there in front of Mr. Ramirez really have no standing before the court.
They do to me. This trial is a joke.
Would the jury in the above entitled action find the defendant, Richard Ramirez, guilty of murder?
You're entitled to your opinion, and that's it. Thank you.
Photographs outside
Shut the camera.
On November the 7th, 1989, he was sentenced to death in the gas chamber, but he wasn't even fazed, and responded with,
Big deal. That's always went with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland.
However, Richard did appeal the decision, which delayed the execution for years. On October the 3rd, 1996, he actually married Doreen Lyoy in San Quentin State Prison, 8 years after proposing. Doreen always said that she would commit suicide if he were to ever be executed.
He's kind, he's funny, he's charming. I think he's a really great person. He's my best friend. He's my buddy.
It feels wonderful. I'm so happy. I'm so thrilled. Very proud and a little relieved that the bulk of the day is over, and just hopefully I can enjoy the rest of my day in peace with Richard's family and think about the importance of what happened today.
To my one and only love, Richard. And I had his engraved too. And his said, I love you forever. And those are, it's nice to look down at your hand, and it's an old-fashioned symbol, but it's a way of reminding yourself that you have a very strong bond with another human being. And the ring, during our wedding ceremony, the Commission of Marriage described our ring as an unbroken circle of love. And that's really exactly what it is. And it just feels good. It's comforting.
It wasn't until August the 7th, 2006, 21 years after his arrest, when his appeal was finally rejected. On September the 7th, a month later, he requested a rehearing, but this was also denied, though he attempted to file countless others.
Did you kill 13 people?
It would be improper for me to comment on my LA convictions and on my pending case here in San Francisco.
Why?
Because of my appeals.
Are you appealing these because you say you're innocent? You didn't kill 13 people?
That is correct.
You didn't kill 13 people?
Again, it would be improper for me to comment in any regard to that question.
It wasn't until 2009 when DNA analysis of the crime scene finally concluded that Richard was responsible for the murder and rape of 9-year-old Mei Lung 25 years earlier. After this news broke, Doreen decided to leave her husband, completely heartbroken to find out what he had done. In 2013, Richard got engaged for a second time to an unknown 23-year-old writer, though on June the 7th that same year, Richard Ramirez passed away from complications from B-cell lymphoma, which is a form of blood cancer, before he could ever be executed. Psychiatrist Michael H. Stone described Richard Ramirez as a made psychopath who wasn't born that way. He claimed he suffered schizoid personality disorder, which caused his lack of remorse, and his constant health issues as a child could have also contributed to his mindset and behavior.
Did he ever acknowledge what he'd done to you, which would be incredible given no acknowledgement or remorse with all of these other crimes?
In that course of my journey, I decided that I was going to take some control and reclaim some of the control. And so what I did, I would write to him. And in one of my letters, I wrote to him because whenever he would have me perform some of these acts, I would pretend to be asleep. And I told him in my letter, do you know those times when I would be pretending to be, did you know I was pretending to be asleep? Or something like that, I said. And then he said, in his letter, he said that yes.
Richard at one time asked me, he just flat out said, Gil, why do you think I am the way I am? Why do you think I did this? And I told him, I'm only a cop, I'm not a doctor. Let psychiatrists examine you. I can't give you the answer. I have no idea why, other than personally I believe it was a sexually driven series that went on. He was deriving sexual pleasure out of it.
I think most humans have in them the capacity to commit murder. It is not because...
No, we don't, Richard.
They choose not to, not because they are morally superior, as they so commonly claim, but because they are imprisoned in a web of responsibilities, commitments, beliefs, and sentiments.
Richard.
And that would render murder an absurd gamble or ridiculous self-destruction.
It changed my life from the day it happened.
Really? How so?
I would say a little mentally, you know.
Kind of tough.
Sure.
We lost our freedom August 6, 1985. Every night now when the sun goes down, we don't know what to expect. You know, there's more than one bad person in this world. And you say the word, you're free. Well, I'm glad you're free because mentally I'm not free when that sun goes down. I have to protect my family and myself. I can't walk up to a stranger anymore and say hello unless I know that person within reason.
He stole my memory, he took my girlfriend, he took my career. And this was just an unprovoked attack.
There was many times I wish I didn't happen.
But you realize without you,
right,
he could have killed many more people.
Sure. You know, throughout the years, you know, I've come to appreciate what I went through or what happened.
Living the way we have the last 4 years is a prison. And this is a sentence that was handed down to us by someone who did not know us. We were ordinary people, much like everyone else in this audience. A violent crime can happen to anyone, mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, and uncle. There is nothing to distinguish you from anyone else. You live in a prison that this person put you in for reasons known only to him. He lives in a cell. He is fed 3 meals a day. For at least a year, we did not know where our next meal was coming from. He was out of work for 6 months. I am now out of work due to my injuries. We have had to reevaluate, move, change our lifestyles. You know, you talk about a crime that happens in a community. It just does not happen to people like my husband and myself or the parents of victims. It happens to all of you. I liken it to a pebble in the pond. Yes, the rings are heavy at first, but it reverberates outwards and it touches every one of us. And we are all responsible for this. I really feel that we owe it to ourselves to stand up for what we believe for and to go out and fight for it.
But 3 years after his death, more secrets emerged as another DNA sample was found at the crime scene of Mei Leung, suggesting that somebody else was in that basement at the time of the murder and may have been an accomplice. This person's identity isn't known to the public, but allegedly they were only a juvenile at the time, and no charges were pressed due to insufficient evidence. But whether or not Richard Ramirez had any assistance in this or any other murders, and what specifically caused him to start such a vicious killing spree, the only thing the rest of us can do is continue seeking answers.